What's up, everybody? This is Brandon from the Old School Game Vault, and today we're going to do a little video blog review of the Sega Dreamcast console. Sega Dreamcast was a forgotten console, but it's perfect for all. It was released in North America in 1999. This console is considered by many to be one of the most innovative consoles of its genre. It's funny to think that this little white box could provide us with splendid home arcade feel. Perhaps even more interesting is the fact that this may have been the first Xbox console. I've been told by a few customers that Sega and Microsoft were collaborating a home video game console together. The console, which the Sega Dreamcast, did have the first detachable phone modem line, which would be right here on the side. Right here, sorry. It's too bad this console did not get the recognition it deserved. It may have been the lackluster titles from the Sega CD library or the Sega 32X library, which may have turned gamers away. It's certainly possible gamers got fed up with the Sega and the struggles with compatibility amongst their consoles. Seriously now, in order to play a Sega 32X CD game, you had to have 3 different consoles or attachments all hooked up together. Then you needed to have a whole power strip of adapters. What the heck was Sega thinking? This certainly could have started the Sega downfall. On the flip side, one would think the Sega Saturn would have given the Sega Dreamcast the notoriety it deserved. The Saturn, which was the predecessor to the Dreamcast, had a great library of fighting games both foreign and domestic. If the Sega Dreamcast was known for being such a state-of-the-art video game console, well, how did it die? Great question right there. That's simple. The arrival of the PS2 and the arrival of DVDs integrated with video game consoles killed the Sega Dreamcast right there. On a couple positive notes, there have been many current game libraries still derived from the Dreamcast library. The library is packed full of any dynamic game any retro gamer would totally enjoy. Not to mention the best version of Marvel vs. Capcom, which has a direct port to the game. So it always kind of baffles me why people don't buy the Dreamcast version when this is the direct arcade port. Everyone goes for the PS2 and the Xbox version, which I don't understand why. And even more surprisingly, after I researched this video blog here, come to find out another game has been released for the Dreamcast. Now this is unofficial. It's not a licensed game by any means, but it's Toe Jam and Earl 3, which many people know that it's popular in the Xbox. Well, like I said, many of the games were ported from the Dreamcast to the Xbox. Another great perk about the ability to play the Sega Dreamcast is the ability to play imported games. This is a really cool feature. You just need to buy a Game Shark CDX. The CDX would act as a cheat code enabler or a buffer to play your imported games. One of the more popular imported games for the Sega Dreamcast had to have been Shenmue 2 in PAL format. Let's go over to the controllers and the accessories. Now this is really my only knock I would give the Dreamcast, would have to be the controllers. Now I couldn't find a genuine controller for this little blog review, but this is a controller and you'll get the idea. I mean, it's kind of big and you really have to kind of stretch your fingers to get to all the buttons, which feels a little strange to me, if you will. The Dreamcast also had a huge variety of other controllers, from racing wheels, flight simulator controllers. Maybe the best controller was the arcade sticks. Arcade sticks were large controllers which created the arcade-type feel while playing your games. Sega did make its own brand of the arcade controllers. There's, however, some third-party Hori controllers that I would highly recommend. Many of the fighting games use this type of controller. Yes, it's optional to buy if you want to play with Marvel vs. Capcom 2 or whatever. On the other hand, these arcade controllers are pretty big, and so it actually, it's maybe the size of this box, a little bigger, so it feels kind of hard to have this sitting in your lap. So sometimes I would always find myself playing on the floor with the arcade controllers. But if you're going to get one, Hori are the way to go. The Dreamcast did have some corny accessories. Most notably was a keyboard and mouse attachment. The only game I ever played with a keyboard was Typing of the Dead, and I never really understood the concepts, so this was my opinion, was a failure, the keyboard and mouse. Memory cards. The Dreamcast had what was called a VMU. Basically, this slid into your controller. I'll get our controller here, and basically it slid in. So when you turned on the game, it activated the screen right here for your VMU. Basically, VMU stands for Virtual Memory Unit. Generally loaded up when you started up the console. There's also other memory cards or memory packs that had data too that you can save, but the VMU is most common with the Dreamcast. They are, however, run on batteries. Now today you probably have to replace them. They're probably, what, 13, 14 years old. But I believe it's a little CR2025 like Energizer battery you can use to replace the battery in the VMU. So that's kind of the memory things. They also had some rumble packs, which you can fit in the slots right here, very similar to like the N64 type stuff. So let's go over the games. I mean, this is really, to me, why the library succeeded, is the games. Fighting games. Now, when I think of Dreamcast, I certainly think of the fighters. The import library probably contains fewer fighters than that of the Sega Saturn. So let's break down the top 5 fighting games for the Dreamcast. Number 1 for me is Power Stone 2, followed by King of Fighters 98. I'd have to go with Soul Calibur. Then I'd have to go with Power Stone 1. Here's Power Stone. It's a great fighting game. Actually, I'm pretty stoked. I think I'm going to play this later this week. I just got this game in on Friday. So Power Stone is definitely there. Then, like I said, we both have our Marvel vs. Capcoms, which I'd highly recommend getting on the Dreamcast. Now, role-playing games. Any true gaming console must excel with its premium RPGs. The Dreamcast had a horde of highly sought-after titles. So here's my top 5. Shenmue, which is probably the most recognized Dreamcast game out there. Then you have Skies of Arcadia, which you can also get on the GameCube. Grandia 2, which I believe was also on PS1. Evolution, the Scared Device, that was a great game. Phantasy Star Online. And then the most popular import game, which I already mentioned before, is Shenmue 2 on PAL format. Now, sports games. Surprisingly, most retro consoles aren't known or aren't thought about for the sports titles. The Dreamcast didn't offer the likes of Madden or NBA Live. Instead, players chose from the Virtua games and 2K games. Many gamers consider the 2K series to be far superior to that of the likes of Madden and NBA Live games during this current generation of gaming. Also, to help sell the sports library, Sega released an all-black sports console. So basically, it was just all black, and it said Sega Sports right here. Let's look at some action-adventure games. This is one section that sets the Dreamcast apart, in my opinion. Many games of this library carry the success of the Dreamcast. One game that I always think of has to be Jet Grind Radio. This is a great game. A lot of people know Crazy Taxi, associate Crazy Taxi with the Dreamcast. Came out in the arcade. Crazy Taxi was great on the Dreamcast. I'd always have to roll with Sonic Adventure 2. Sounds corny, I know, Sonic games, but I like Sonic Adventure 2. I thought it was a good game. Crazy Taxi, like I mentioned before. And then the last action-adventure game I would say is Resident Evil 2. I mean, there's no game in the 90s that set horror survival like Resident Evil, so you had to play Resident Evil on the Dreamcast. We're going to go to some racing shooter games. The Dreamcast library did not offer any of the Need for Speed or Gran Turismo games that were popular at the time. It did, however, counter with its own Sega GT series. The Formula 1 games were also popular, and let's not forget about the Crazy Taxi series. This was also a good game, Little San Francisco Rush 2049, also popular on Nintendo, but it was a good racing game nonetheless. Now, shooters. One game that every retro gamer thinks about when you say Dreamcast and shooters in the same sentence has to be the House of the Dead 2. It's really kind of strange since there was never a House of the Dead 1, but the House of the Dead 2 was the best played with a gun controller attachment. However, there are other shooters, but nothing stands out for me. Honorable mentions would be Banjo, Gunbird, Mars Matrix, and Quake 3. So in conclusion, the Dreamcast was surely an extraordinarily gaming console, which was very groundbreaking with hosting online gaming servers. When you look back at any console and examine the library of RPG games and fighters, the Dreamcast is certainly a retro console for all. If you've never picked up a Dreamcast, they can be purchased relatively cheap and can create hours of enjoyment for all. So that's it. That's my review for the Sega Dreamcast console. It was a great little console, and I'd highly recommend it to anybody out there who wants to go back and play some retro stuff. I'm Brandon from the Old School Game Vault. Thanks for watching. Like my video if you like what I say. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.